Hey guys, I'm back again to talk about A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. This time I thought I would do kind of a fun episode and just sort of geek out about the story and some of the simpler things I love about it. So let's play the favorite game. I'm going to answer a bunch of questions about my favorite things. What are all my favorite things about A Song of Ice and Fire? First up is my favorite book. My favorite book is the first one, A Game of Thrones. The reason, I think, is because that's the book that starts everything off. But it's more than that. It's that it's the oldest book in the series. And being the oldest book, it's the one most densely packed with meaning. Because it's the one that the author had the most time to retroactively infuse with meaning. So because of that, there's hardly anything in it that doesn't matter. You can be pretty certain that whatever sentence you're reading in it has bigger implications for the story and blossoms into something bigger for you to find in the later books. A Game of Thrones, definitely my favorite book. Favorite chapter? That one's easy too. A Game of Thrones, Bran 3. That's the one that's almost entirely a dream. Bran has a dream about the crow. He's trying to teach him how to fly or something. But there's all kinds of really cool symbolic stuff happening in it. That this book and this chapter being so early in the story, there can be no doubt that all of this cool symbolism has bigger meanings and implications for the story as a whole. And I love puzzling over what those meanings are. Sometimes I think, the day when I write about A Game of Thrones Bran 3, and I'm completely happy with it, is the day when I'll know I'm finished with A Song of Ice and Fire. But that still doesn't really get to the bottom of what I really love about this chapter. In the dream, Bran is falling, and falling is symbolic of failure. It also actually happened to him when he fell and broke his legs. And his disability is crushing for him. And he's struggling to come to terms with his disability and find new meaning in life to replace his dreams of knighthood. And it's a struggle that lasts through all of the story. But that's his challenge, is to try to overcome the tragedy of his situation and of life, and not escape into his direwolf, which I see as analogous to video games, and not become embittered about existence and his dependence on other people, and the loss of his dreams of knighthood, and being the hero that he loves to hear about in all these stories that he gets from Old Nan. So Bran learning to fly in the dream seems like it's symbolic of Bran's self-actualizing and becoming whatever talents are left to him after losing his mobility. And it looks like his talents are... It's a very inspirational chapter. Favorite character? Arya Stark, tied with Daenerys Targaryen. It used to be just Arya. But after I studied Dany more closely, I thought, yeah, I'm super sympathetic to her. My favorite sword, Dawn. One of the things I love about A Song of Ice and Fire is that it's very low magic. I love magic, but I just feel like a lot of stories with magic in it don't quite earn it. And it becomes kind of a problem with power creep and plot difficulties regarding fast travel and time travel and having magical solutions to things that would have been more interesting problems for the characters to have to solve in a mundane way. And Dawn, the way I think about Dawn, is that it's the ultimate legendary sword for a low magic D&D campaign. Like if I were going to make a low magic D&D campaign, and I had to design the ultimate sword in that setting, it would be exactly like Dawn. So let's go over everything about Dawn. It's made from a fallen star. I think any mysterious material would work, but a fallen star is a good one. It's sharper than anything. It never loses its edge. And because it never loses its edge, that means you don't even have to adhere to sword handling practices. You can you can use it like a walking stick, or drag it on the ground, and it doesn't make any difference. It's never going to change, no matter what you do to it. Now, I probably wouldn't treat it that way anyway, just because those are bad habits, and I don't like to develop bad habits if I can avoid it. But as a user of Dawn, I think it would be important to know that you could use it those ways, if you need to. It produces its own light. That's amazing if you're trying to go through a dark cave or a forest or something. And I think the light even gets brighter the darker things get, from what I remember. And it produces its own heat. And I think the heat even gets hotter the more violent things get, from what I remember. So basically, it's a torch that never runs out of fuel, that isn't going to set things on fire by accident, and that lasts forever, and it'll keep you warm, so you never have to go to sleep cold or freeze to death, or even make a fire if you're just too tired to make a fire. Now, I'm not sure how big the sword is, but I think I would want it to be a bastard sword, or I could use it one-handed or two-handed, depending on the situation. But if it's a one-handed or two-handed sword, either way, would still be really good too. It comes with a cool mantle. You get to be called the Sword of the Morning. I'm not really much of a morning person, but I like what morning represents. It's a new day. It represents something like hope. But Dawn is kind of obviously the best sword in the story. So, excluding Dawn, my first choice besides Dawn would probably be Blackfire, the ancestral Targaryen sword. It looks really cool, and it's Valyrian steel, so it'll never lose its edge or break. But for me, the appeal of the swords is mostly in their names and in their symbolism. And so Blackfire, I think, has the second coolest name in symbolisms. To me, it represents being one of the rare few people who see through the false narrative of the Blackfires are pretenders or whatever. The Blackfires are the real McCoy, actually. The ruling Targaryens are the pretenders. And it's because Nerys, the prim and proper saint of the Seven, was actually a narcissistic adulterer who was cucking her husband because she couldn't get over her childhood crush, who made Faith her facade. She was like, "Me, an adulterer? I pray at the sept every day." Yeah, and you make sure somebody sees you doing it, too. Because if nobody sees you doing it, you know you're wasting your time. I think that's probably who Nerys was. And the histories have whitewashed her to support Daeron's claim. My favorite house. House Liber. Because their sigil is a cat in a jug. So basically, they're house pussies in jugs. Oh, George R.R. Martin. I see what you're doing. I'm just kidding, though. My favorite house is House Stark. I'm basic like that. But I feel like a lot of people who say a different house are just kind of bullshitting because they don't want people to think they're basic. So at least I'm not doing that. My favorite region in Westeros. That depends on if you mean to live in or which one I think is more narratively intriguing. To live in, I would choose the Reach. Easily. It's the region of abundance. There's a whole bunch of space and food and nature. It'd be like living in eternal spring. So I wouldn't have to worry about my basic needs so much. And then I could focus on other things that interest me more, like reading books or playing music, or looking at the stars or whatever. My favorite region in Westeros for narrative intrigue, that's the North. And the reason is because the North are the last holdouts for the old gods. And I love anything to do with the old gods. My favorite religion is the old gods, and it's not even close. And it's the same answer for which religion would I have if I lived in the story, and which religion is most intriguing to me. But not counting the old gods, then my favorite religion to live with, I think would probably be Mother Royne. Something about just living on the river and worshipping the river, eating turtle soup and fishing all day and swimming. The river's basically even a road, so you can have fast travel, at least relatively fast. And that would enable a lot of trading and culture and give way to a culture of boating and water sports and boatcraft. And I like seafood and I like sunshine and nature. Sign me up for Mother Royne. But for narrative intrigue, I think Relorism, the Red God, there's a lot of depth in that one. And I see it as kind of opposite to the old gods. It seems like an equal and opposite kind of religion that's less familiar to me. It's very backwards to the way I tend to look at the world. I think the Unsullied's religion is really interesting too, but we don't really know anything about it. But that's kind of why it's interesting to me. They worship the Lady of Spears, but she has other names like the Mother of Hosts. And I just want to know more about it. They're not allowed to talk about it. It's like, well, when you say that, now I have to know. Come on. Hopefully we'll get more about it in the future. I remember a theory that the Unsullied's god is Daenerys. I don't think it's Daenerys. Maybe, but I doubt it. My favorite dragon. If you mean my favorite dragon name, Sea Smoke. What a sexy, badass fucking name. Sea Smoke. But my favorite dragon in terms of their deeds, I honestly don't know the dragon's deeds that well. But from some things I've read in the audience recently about the Dance of the Dragons, it sounds like Sunfire has got a pretty good list of deeds. He might have been a real badass if the things people are saying are true. I only read The Dance of the Dragons once, a long time ago, so I'm due for a reread on that. But my favorite dragon regarding appearances, I honestly don't know what they look like very well. I think among Dany's dragons, it's gotta be Rhaegal, the green one. But if I were gonna have my own dragon, I think if Sea Smoke looks like what his name makes him look like in my head, then Sea Smoke is my answer. I would want my dragon to be colored primarily in the blues, secondarily greens, and spotted with clouds of white and black, and speckled here and there with a smattering of red spots, with pearl white wings, black horns, spines, claws, tail spikes, and teeth, and blue flame, shot through with black and red. That'll be my dragon. I guess he needs a name. Names are harder. I might just name him after Sea Smoke, but I'd want to be original, So I would think about it for a month to try to come up with a name half as cool as Sea Smoke. My favorite side character, Rhaegar Targaryen. Very interesting guy. But he's a terrible person? Keep reading and pay more attention. A close second place is Khal Drogo. Also an interesting guy. There's more to him than we tend to think. And I'll leave it at that. My favorite region outside of Westeros, if you mean culturally, the Dothraki Sea. But if you mean environmentally, it's still the Dothraki Sea, now that I think of it. Wide open plains, beautiful horses everywhere you look, plenty of wildlife, packs of wild dogs, open sky, a big beautiful mountain, a big beautiful lake. The Dothraki Sea's got all kinds of cool stuff. That sounds like a cool place to live. But unlike the Dothraki people, I wouldn't have any problems with carving into the land and growing food. My favorite prophecy or mystery? Well, The Girl in Grey was my first big foray into A Song of Ice and Fire, prophecy and mystery. So I feel like I have to say that one. And I do still like it a lot. But I think before I'm finished with this story, my favorite will be The Song of Ice and Fire, also known as The Prince That Was Promised, or Azor Ahai. Because I can already see my favoritism toward it developing while I'm working on it. My favorite side in the Dance of the Dragons. Oh boy. The Blacks are a more colorful set of characters. Certainly with the way the in-story histories are written. But on principle, I side with the Greens. Their claim was the right one. And the colorfulness and badassery of the Greens is just as present, but you have to dig it out from beneath the surface of the Blacks' bias of history. My favorite king. The bad guys. Aegon IV, Aerys II. If half of what I've heard about Maegor is true, then Maegor. But I still need to read that. With Aegon IV and Aerys II, I think behind the propaganda, they were really cool guys to begin with. Particularly Aegon IV, the unworthy. I think he was probably almost a saint. But I haven't dug into that enough yet to say for sure. But this guy tolerated his brother, who was also his sworn royal bodyguard, fucking his wife behind his back, and then flaunting it at court and in a public tournament, and producing a bastard, and then passing the bastard off as the trueborn son of Aegon, and Aegon just went along with it, to keep his family and kingdom from having to suffer the fallout. I suspect that before I finish analyzing Aegon the Unworthy, I'm gonna need to find a halo for this dude. Aegon the Conqueror is really intriguing to me too. It seems like he had a very strong ethos of might is right and fairness. That the strong have a right, and more than that a responsibility, to rule over and dominate the weak, which has pretty horrendous implications. And as much as Aegon's conquest is referred to as something to be admired, I noticed that it's referred to that way in the thoughts of characters who trend a little toward villainy, like Tyrion. And I think that hints at the opposite side of the coin, that actually Aegon's conquest was at least equal parts monstrous, as it was impressive. And then I see that blind spot to the ugly flip side of the coin, playing out in the audience's interpretations of his family members, like Daenerys. But at the same time, he had a very strong disgust for unfairness, which makes a lot of sense when your core ethos is competition, because if you're competitive to the bone, You don't want to be cheated out of a fair fight, and you don't want anyone else to either. You want every contest to return as the victor, the side who was actually stronger, and return as the loser, the side who was actually weaker. So it's essentially the worship of strength, or competence, or power, or evolutionary fitness even. Which kind of reveals how dependent might as right attitudes are upon the person's ability for abstract thought. Because those are all abstractions of strength with their own kind of validity that you overlook at your own risk. And Aegon the Conqueror seems like he might have had a good ability for abstraction, accompanying his might, because only the Dornish were able to resist him. And I think the way that they did it hints at Aegon's limitations, maybe including his ability to abstract strength in ways that can compete with Dorne's strategy of perseverance and being everywhere and nowhere at once. It's a super interesting conflict to me. No amount of power could cow the Dornish spirit of freedom and independence. I think there's a little Dornish in all of us. Alright. That's all the favorites I could think of. If you can think of more, leave them in a comment, and maybe I'll do another favorites episode in the future. Thanks for hanging out. I'll see you next time.